Welcome everyone. Very good evening from India Livelihoods Collective. Thanks a lot for joining us in first EgTech Thursday event that we are doing with MSC, CSR Box and India Livelihoods Collective together. So let me just take 30 seconds to 1 minute to tell you about India Livelihoods Collective and then give the context of it, why we are doing this EgTech Thursday today and then what is the series that we are going to follow after this Thursday. And then I'll pass on to the team which is going to manage the entire show for you today. So India Livelihoods Collective is a non-commitment, non-funding based collaboration of companies, CSR foundations, non-profits and expert agencies coming together with one objective of collaborating, connecting and amplifying impacts in the entire livelihood spectrum in India. Amplifying collaborative opportunities wherever it comes in through private sector engagement, private government, non-profit engagement, or even private advisory firms and other type of engagement where we can look at farm-based interventions, non-farm-based interventions, and urban jobs ecosystem, especially looking at the COVID-19 situation and even the beyond COVID-19, India has a lot of potential to improve the livelihood ecosystem on all these three parameters which I spoke recently. We launched the collective on 8th of June. It has been almost 2.5 months now for us, and we have been managing all 25 partners right now. Some of them are companies, a few ones are consulting. There are large non-profits for some of the largest names in India like Bayer, Pradhan, or any good livelihood non-profit that you can account in India. All of them are part of this collective, and the idea is how do we bring together the expertise which has been garnered by these all non-profits, these CSR foundations, and even the consulting firms, and really help other organizations to scale up their program or think of new innovative program wherever there are mutual synergies. We have done almost 3 different type of series and events in last 2.5 months, largely looking at the livelihood series on farm-based interventions, non-farm-based interventions, and urban jobs ecosystem, which we called Livelihoods Action Series. It was hosted sometime in July end. June end, and then July we did some of the boot camp, a couple of other things, and then we also recently launched a compendium of almost 45 best practices in livelihoods, including farm-based and non-farm-based interventions. In next coming days, we are going to host a few special boot camps on how do we really create an entrepreneurial ecosystem for self-help groups. How can we create more livelihood opportunities by micro level interventions through non-profits or even through other type of local institutions and build capacities of local institutions. Then we are also facilitating a couple of partnership with companies, mutual collaboration in different geographies. We are identifying different geographic pockets in India to work with companies, CSR foundations, even the tech companies to do pilots and take pilots to the mainstream interventions in certain geographies on agri-based interventions or even beyond the agriculture ecosystem. Coming back to this EgTech Thursday, the entire EgTech Thursday idea comes from this landscape of Atmanirbhar Bharat and helping India's farmers to really double their income by 2022 or even sometime in 2023. How we can leverage technology to help India's farmers and farming ecosystem. And obviously farmers are backbone of the all type of livelihood interventions that we think of. Even the non-farm based interventions or value chain based interventions in the farm ecosystem, farmers are at the crux of all these interventions. So we have to have an approach where farmers are the first beneficiary for all type of technology interventions that we are thinking in agriculture ecosystem. Going by that particular focus area, we discussed this idea among all the stakeholders which are connected with us in India Livelihoods Collective and came up with this EgTech Thursday model where we select 1, 2, 3 Thursdays in a series and we do all EgTech related discussions on different type of ideas, interventions and scaling up of those interventions and collaborations to talk about EgTechs. So this is the first day or first Thursday for us where we are largely talking about understanding the landscape of agriculture technology in India. What type of interventions are there? What type of startups are there which have really moved from startup phase to the mainstream companies or interventions or social enterprises, and they are really helping India's farmers or farming ecosystem by their technology, be it crop management, livestock, or input or platform, any other type of things. Then we will also talk about very particular nuances or stepwise approach of agriculture technology interventions in different arena of agriculture ecosystem, about livestock, input, platform, and again services in agriculture ecosystem. Then the next Thursday will follow, or the third Thursday, we are yet to announce the date for third Thursday, but that will come about understanding the investors, donors, incubators, scope for CSR interventions, and different other enabling services or partnership enabling ecosystem, which can really help us to take our agriculture agri-tech partnerships with companies, or helping this agtech to really come up with some impact while working with non-profits, while working with farmers, FPOs, or different other local institutions. So the third Thursday will largely focus on that. And then we probably build on this Thursday. We are not going to stop with first, second, and third Thursdays in terms of this series. Probably there will be another value added, and where there will be many other Thursdays which will follow up in terms of best practices, in terms of what are the new models which are emerging, and then we also explore that which are the arenas where we can look at partnership and collaborations, be it service based, or be it particular theme based, sub theme based, or be it geographic and cluster based. Different type of partnership more canvas which we are going to explore. Even we are looking at partnering with state government and state departments, and look at state specific Thursdays as well in the coming months. So be with us in for a couple of Thursdays, and let's really work together to help India's farmers. With this, I'll pass on to Bhagyashree to introduce today's panel and what all they are going to talk about. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bhaumik, for such a wonderful setting for this event today. So our first session today looks at the AgTech landscape context, and we have three esteemed panelists to lead the discussions for today's session. Our first panelist is Mr. Anil Kumar Gupta. He is a partner at MSC and heads the digital financial services, payments and distribution domain. He is a hands-on development banker and technology manager with over 2 decades of experience. Anil has worked on projects with development banks, commercial banks, international funding agencies, community-based institutions, rural infrastructure projects, and major telecommunication players in India, China, and the USA. Mr. Anil will be accompanied by Mr. Anurag Saxena. Anurag heads the strategic initiatives for MSC Global Offices. He is a strategy consultant with over 13 years of experience gained through projects with governments, international funding agencies, non-profits, and corporates in Bangladesh, Hong Kong, India, Kyrgyzstan, Oman, and the USA. He also focuses on applications of emerging fintech solutions, including blockchain and AI. And finally, to bring in the startups perspective in the AgTech landscape, we have with us Mr. Rajkumar KVM. He is the co-founder and MD Agri Transaction at PayAgri. Prior to this, he has also been associated with Terra Green, Samunnati, and Farmsys. An investment banker turned agriculturist with over 16 years of experience in deal origination and deal execution in agriculture, renewable energy, food processing, IT, and infrastructure, and BFSI. Welcome all of you. Over to you, Anil and Anurag.
You're on mute, Anil.
I cannot unmute myself, so
now you're audible, Anil. Yeah.
Okay, great. So maybe I can begin.
Yes, Anil.
So I'm sharing my screen, and I will run you through with a small presentation. Rakeshri, can you enable my screen sharing?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I hope all of you can see the presentation that I have.
Yes, Anil, it's there.
Yes.
So first of all, I would like to thank Bhaumik for setting the contest. I think he has set the ground rules and he has given the long-term vision that what he's trying to achieve. And I would like to welcome each and everyone on this webinar. Good evening from my side. Before I begin, let me first thank my colleague Anurag and Bhumik because they initially thought, discussed, and they finally came up with this idea and they gave us this opportunity to present to you like what's really going on in this sector and this segment. I would also like to thank some of the other organizations because they have been supporting us and they were the reason why some of this work has been done. First of them would be Rabo Foundation because few of the things that I'm going to present, it is thanks to their generous support that we understand and we're going to present that. And I would also like to thank Philanthropy Initiative of JP Morgan because we run a financial inclusion lab in which is supported by JP Morgan, and that helps us accelerate a variety of fintechs, and some of them happen to work for the farmers. We have Rajkumar KVM also from PayAgri. He was also one of the incubators from the financial inclusion lab. I would basically divide my presentation across 3 dimensions. First is that about the farmers. Let's understand their contribution to agriculture and farmers in our economy. Before we face, because they are facing a lot of issues around sustainable livelihood, we will come to that later on. And secondly, we will look at the AgTech landscape, what exactly is happening in that area and what are the challenges those AgTechs are facing. And then I will basically just cover briefly that what are few thoughts that what is that we can do together in terms of on one side we have AgTech, we have on the other side we have so many other ecosystem players, those who can come together, and we can do something better for the farmers, for the farming community, and maintaining a better and sustainable livelihood. I see a lot of members. They are from the agriculture community, and I think they understand it more than anyone else. So, but I think still it is better that first let us understand some basic numbers in India. And this is all about agriculture before we can talk about farmers and their situation, because we know that what is the situation, but we should first know that what agriculture is all about in the context of our country. I think we have no doubts in our mind about the importance of agriculture and allied activities. For example, I get up in the morning and have a cup of tea. All the ingredients like milk, tea leaf, ginger, sugar, it all come from different farm schedules. Fortunately, in addition to that, I need some water, which is a natural resource. Almost whole of the day, I enjoy the fruit of hard labor of farmers through a variety of cereals, fruits, and vegetables. I think that goes for most of us. Overall, there is a strong value proposition that agriculture and allied sector brings to the economy. In terms of value, it adds around $368 billion US dollars in the economy as per 2018-19 numbers. And 10% of it is exported. So it provides contribution to the export market also. This sector provides, interestingly, livelihood to nearly half of the population and has made India self-sufficient in terms of food grain. The growth in agri has almost plateaued with a subpar 4% growth if you look at a very long period of time. Despite so much of hard labor, it contributes only around 16% of the national GDP. Now, if we combine 2 sets of data, one is per capita income contribution from farming community, particularly if we take it to the small farmers, the number of family members that are dependent on that, it shows that how vulnerable farmers are. However, there's something more to these numbers. If you look at overall level, gross value added in agriculture and allied sector, it registered a growth of 4% in last financial year, that is 2019-20. This is extremely commendable. Let's look at extremely commendable considering the overall growth of economy at 3.9% in terms of GVA and GDP growth of 4.2%. And as per the latest estimate, even in 2021, when the impact of COVID-19 will be on full display and when the GDP may register a negative growth varying from 5 to 6 degrees, 5 to 6%, agriculture may still surprise with a positive growth of 2.5%. So this is something that we should keep in mind. I would also like to highlight that this sector has shown a great resilience, particularly during current pandemic. Despite so many problems that we have been facing due to COVID-19 situation, government is able to provide ration to a large number of people thanks to buffer stock and massive production. And all of us are able to buy almost everything that we need to buy in terms of food grain without much difficulties. Let us take a closer look at the profile of the farmers in India. One of the major reasons why do we see so much of migration and issues around them? Overall, we see there are 146 million farmers in India. And I think it's not a surprise for most of you, but most of them, or around 86% of them, they are small and marginal farmers. The small and marginal farmers are typically, they have a land holding of less than 2 hectares or 5 acres. And this is one of the most vulnerable segments that we are talking about. With nearly 19 million medium farmers, we have just less than 1 million farmers who have more than 10 hectares of land, and those are classified as large farmers. On the right, if you see the yield, we are much below as compared to several other leading countries. Let me take an example of China. It's a very interesting example. The Chinese agriculture growth has been around 4.5% over the last 40 years. And this is interesting on 2 counts. One is that it produces 3 times more agri-produce per hectare as compared to us. And let's also understand, this is also a very large country. Second, and more interesting, is that the average land holding size of China is about 0.7 hectare, which is more than, which is less than ours, which is around 1 hectare. So we can well imagine that prosperity at the bottom of the pyramid in China provides a large demand base for their industry good. We also see that migration out of agriculture is largely from a demand pull to higher productivity sector with better skills in China. In contrast, if you look at what's happening in India, at several places, migration is from a push factor because agri cannot support a large percentage of working population. So let me share a small story with you to give you a better context. This is a story of a farmer, and name of the farmer is, say, Shyam Mohan. He is a small farmer in Alwar district of Rajasthan. Like a typical small farmer, he has inherited a land parcel of around 4 acres. And this is his main asset to feed his family of 4 to 5 people, which is not the case in our Indian context. His family typically help in farming, and they also rear a buffalo to supplement their income in case they have surplus milk. In terms of his cropping profile, he typically grows mustard as rabi crop or winter crop, because this is what is being grown by most of the people around him. Shyam has all the requirements like anyone else. He faces the emergency situation due to health or any other certain requirement and need cash at those times of time. To overcome that, he has been investing in social capital, or relies on own savings or local money lender or commission agent for his financing needs. In the past, he tried to access the bank finance. For that purpose, he visited the bank branches, which are around 15 to 20 kilometers because he lives quite far off. However, a lot of documentation requirement from the bank or from a financial system made him realize that it was not meant for him. On the other hand, banks also find it difficult because it's very difficult for them to lend to such farmers in absence of enough data and high costs associated with that. So for his main profession is agriculture. So he relies on local dealers, cooperative societies for procuring seeds and other inputs. He has limited say in terms of what he gets and at what price he gets. He relies for irrigation, he relies on Indradev or the rain god for most of his irrigation facilities. He hopes that weather will continue to help him and get the harvest that he wants. He is always afraid of some pest, locust, unseasonal rain or wind because they can destroy the crop. After passing through all the hurdles, he realizes that the prices in market have crashed. He feels that he can store the crop and sell that later for more money. Most of the time he needs money to repay his borrowing. So he has to forgo that option. So I think we all can empathize with Shyam, and more so in the current situation. With that, let me go to the next slide, wherein I'm going to talk about some of the key issues that farmers face. Many of these you have heard in some or other form in the story of Shyam. Farmers face challenge across the entire value chain, from pre-production to production to post-production. If you look at their core requirement, farmers in many areas struggle to get proper seeds, pesticides, and fertilizers. Thanks to Aadhaar-based authentication that we have now in India for fertilizer uptake, we see that most of the farmers are able to get fertilizer without much problem. In absence of adequate irrigation facilities, most of the farmers, they depend on rains. Considering the small farm size, it's very difficult for them to own the farm machinery. And it's really not practical for most of the farmers in India. This means they need to rely more on human labor. And thanks to NREGA and migration, what we see that cost of labor itself is also rising. We also see that there is a limited diversification of agriculture, which make it unsustainable from the soil perspective. We also see that farmers run their enterprise with very high level of risk, but with limited options and means to hedge those risks. This may be both a demand side as well as supply side problem. Even if farmer has a good harvest, he continues to face that he hardly understands or able to control. Most of the time, good productivity, thanks to say no attack and better rainfall, does not translate into commensurate profit. Small farmers find not enough surplus to store, or there is limited storage facilities of both open field as well as covered areas. This leads to a lot of post-harvest losses. And we know that till very recently, supply chain is mired with a lot of regulation, and middleman with a lot of efficiencies was already there. Most of these boil down to limited linkage with markets, and because they are not linked with the market, there is a possibility that they are not getting the right or remunerated prices. We have Rajkumar among us, so basically whenever he is going to speak, we'll talk about more about it, that how are they trying to solve this problem. If you look at overall level, what we see is that there are more number of people that depend on farming than what it can really support. Further, based on our data and analysis, limited number of farmers are able to borrow from formal sources, and borrowing from informal sources also adds to their production cost. Let me just try to unpack one of the problems around financing of farmers in India, because this is something which everyone is seized of, and this is where we work very extensively. At a macro level, what we see that banks are providing a lot of credit to the farming activities. And in 2018-19, they provided something like $168 billion. And they set out a target of about 182 odd billion for 1920. If you look at the numbers, what it tells us that everyone is meeting the target of priority sector lending. But what we see is that typically the focus is on the large loans. And around 50% of the credit that they offer, it comprises of those large loans typically handed out to medium and large farmers. And thanks to multiple guidelines that we have around the PSL certificates and other things, even private sector banks and the foreign banks, which are not at all active in this space, they buy them or they trade into those certificates and they become compliant to the regulatory requirement. Let us also look at how farmers raise financial resources. As I said earlier, there are only 30% of the farmers, those who are able to borrow from formal sources. It means 70% of them, they are either not able to borrow or they borrow from informal sources. And if we look at particularly small and medium farmers, small and marginal farmers, what we see, half of them, they are not able to borrow from any of the source. Of the remaining half, nearly 40%, they are at the mercy of informal lenders. This is a really grave situation of farmer financing in India. It may be better if we look at medium and large farmers, but definitely it is much worse for small and marginal farmers, which forms something like 86% of total farmer base. Let me try to connect this with the framework of livelihood. Basically, this is in this framework. What I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to conceptualize livelihood in a slightly holistic manner, and it is capturing many complexities of livelihood and the constraints and opportunities that they are subjected to. These constraints and opportunities, they are shaped by various factors ranging from global or national level trends and structures over which individuals or individual farmers, they have no control. Most of the time, they are not even aware of the external environment in which they are really operating. As we all know, people, particularly if you look at farmers and other low and middle income people, they are vulnerable on various counts. In our context, these vulnerabilities refer to the environment in which people live. This includes, as I said, trends such as national and international economic trend. There is a change in available technology. There is a change in political system, and you know that we see a lot of those changes whenever government changes. This also includes plenty of shocks that they are subject to. For example, illness, death, any conflict in the region, weather, and very importantly, seasonality. Because for farmers, this becomes extremely important. There is a seasonality in prices, production cycles. We see every few years there is a glut, and so on and so forth. This becomes very, very important because these are all vulnerabilities. And these have direct impact on the possibilities that poor people have to earn a living now and in the future. We know that season shift in prices, production, employment opportunities are one of the most enduring sources of hardship for poor people all over the world. Hence, the idea of asset is central to sustainable livelihood approach. Rather than understanding poverty as a simply a lack of income, I think we should look at sustainable livelihood approach to consider assets that poor people need in order to sustain an adequate income of life. So we are in this figure, if you see, we are referring to 5 types of assets or capital. Let me just try to explain briefly what do I mean. First is human capital. I think all of us will understand. This is all about skill and knowledge, the ability to work, and good health. Good health is not simply a means to earning a livelihood, but interestingly, it is a course and it itself. Social capital, if you look at social, this I briefly mentioned in the beginning. Social resource, this is something that people draw on to make a living, such as relationship with either more powerful people or with others like themselves, or memberships of groups or organizations. That's a reason we see a lot of those things happening in the rural areas. In financial circle and in the context of poor people, sometimes we call this as liquidity farming. It typically helps poor people to draw on in case there is a need. For example, most of us maintain some balances in our bank account that we can draw on, but these poor people, they find it difficult to maintain the bank balances, hence they invest in this social capital. This is a relationship of trust, reciprocity, and exchange. The third is natural capital, which is natural resources which is available for all, and everyone can draw on them. Fourth is physical capital. Physical capital is a basic infrastructure, and this is something which is also available or not available depending on the area where you live in. And the fifth one is very simple, which is financial capital, which is more like a saving that all of us are familiar with. And it is access to those services and making sure that there is a regular flow of money. Typically, the more asset any household have access to, the less vulnerable they will be. Generally, what we also see that these capitals or these assets are interconnected. It means if there is an increase in one type of capital, it can lead to increase in another type of capital. For example, as people become educated, which means there is an increase in human capital, they may get a better job which earns more money. It means there is an increase in financial capital. Sometimes there is a possibility that one may diminish the other, and this typically happens in an Indian context whenever people they sell their land and they migrate to city. The other thing which is very important in the context of livelihood is that structure and processes. These are something where private and public institutions they need to work on so that people are able to reduce their vulnerabilities. But let's try to understand that what is that we are trying to do with all these things. I think there are four very important things that we want out of that. One is that we want, as Bhaumik said in the beginning, we want more income in the hands of farmers like Shyam. And as you know, income is a function of cost of production and market price of produce. In other words, it covers the entire value chain from procurement of inputs to farming to storing to sale in the market. So Shyam needs support on several steps to make sure that he is able to achieve this outcome. Second thing, what we want is that we want to reduce vulnerabilities, and this includes basically it includes that there is a stable and conducive policy environment. It would also mean that there are right options through appropriate solutions which are available to farmers so that they can overcome shocks of any emergencies like illness or weather. In addition, we also need to work on reducing the impact of seasonality on prices. Like, for example, potato prices. I live in Delhi. Like media has been talking about that potato prices are already in Delhi season, but definitely it has not translated price rise or commensurate price rise to the farmer. So, farmer like Shyam needs the right solution to build this resilience and employ better agri practices and provision to overcome this shock. So this is the second thing that we need. Third is that we know that natural resources are limited. So we also need to see that we are using them in a sustainable manner. It will require better agri practices like zero budget natural farming. This is something we see a few examples through progressive farmers in different parts of India. And the fourth is we want to improve the food security for vulnerable section in the country and if possible for others outside the country also. This makes a farmer and farming so important for us. The other thing that remains important in terms of livelihood outcome is providing employment or rather gainful employment to more number of people. This will also help Shyam to increase his household income. So with this context, let me now take you to the next section, which is all around AgTechs, how they are funded, what is that they are doing. I think most of you would know that there are hundreds of interesting AgTech solutions in India. To make a sense out of so many solutions, what we thought, let's put them into category. Let's put them into 6 buckets. We have categorized them into 6 buckets. These buckets include farm management and data analytics, where startups are trying to capture data using a variety of options like remote sensing options, including Internet of Things, to build a predictive model for the large area. It can also help in crop monitoring. Imagine a situation in which an AgTech can help the community to know upcoming weather disturbance. So if there is upcoming weather disturbance, it can allow farmers to take a decision to harvest now versus later. If this type of tool or this type of information is available to farmers like Shyam, what they can do, they can try to get some income now instead of substantially losing the crop later on. There are a number of AgTechs, those who are working in this space, and we will hear about this solution and how it can help the farmers and livelihood from the cropping in next webinar. Another category of AgTech is dealing with agri inputs. They are able to procure the right inputs for the farmers without any middleman and arrange for their distribution. So basically they are on the supply side. They use both technology and physical touch points to do that. Some of them also help in supply chain in terms of supplying the produce also. We will have Dehat with us next week to share their story about this part. The third category is what we are calling is that they deal with basically to make sure that post-harvest issues that farmers face, they can be taken care of. On one hand, as part of that, on one hand, they look at demand aggregation from small or retail customer as well as customers, so that because they are the buyers. On the other hand, they are looking at aggregating supplies from the farmers through a network or through FPOs so as to meet this demand. So basically they are working on both the sides, from the producer as well as from the consumers. So anyways, we have Rajkumar from PayAgri. He will talk about this initiative later on. And the fourth category is something which is our personal favorite, where we do a lot of work on that, this is agri-financing and fintech. This is where you will find AgTechs and fintechs, they are intersecting. Basically, these AgTechs, they work with farmers or a set of farmers to provide them funds across the entire agri value chain. They look at farmers onboarding in a digital environment to the extent possible, and credit scoring. They also do a lot of credit scoring using alternate data services. So during next week, we will have Jai Kisan, who extensively works in this space, and they will talk more about it. The fifth category is focusing on livestock management. And this is very interesting category because this primarily is dealing with the allied activities, and it is able to help enhance income and able to provide a lot of employment opportunities for people in rural areas. They look at variety of livestock, from cattle to poultry to fisheries. And one of the most vibrant around livestock management would be around milk value chain. Fortunately, we will have Stallops, which is one of the very promising startups in India, and they will be with us next week and they will talk more about it. And the last is a fairly fancy one, which is more about novel farming or mechanization. As we said that if you look at farmers like Shyam, those who are small marginal farmers, it's very difficult for them to own farm machinery due to small farm size. There are AgTechs like EM3, which is providing farming service on pay-per-use basis, which is something like what we do when we use prepaid mobile phone. So what they are able to do is they are able to provide services to the farmers on a sachet-based basis or a small basis so that farmers can afford that. Similarly, considering that there is a lot of advancement in technology, so AgTechs like Future Farms, that's another AgTech in this space, it can help the farmers to set up high-tech farms, which can be vertical farming or novel farming. I'm sure that this world of AgTech is quite amazing and interesting, and there is a need of market, and with appropriate policies in place, what we have seen, there are thousands of AgTechs in Indian market, and most of them, they have come in last few years. So as per the latest data that we have, there are more than 3,000 AgTechs in India, and we are globally we are second in the world, and we are growing on an average 25 to 30%. This is possible because there is a huge demand and there is a need, and people are working to people are working this space trying to solve this problem. And you know that wherever you have startups, investors can't be far behind, and definitely it has caught up the fancy of investors. So far, this segment is able to attract something like $500 million US since 2014, which is in 5 to 6 years. But if you see, most of it has come very recently, as early as in 2019. And if we see the latest trend where the money is really going, what we see is that a lot of money is going into farm to fork, which is more about supply chain, and factory to farm link. Completed 6 months. What we see despite pandemic, I think this segment or this AgTech world is flourishing, and in 6 months of 2020, they are able to attract around $85 million across 15 days. However, it's not that there are many investors who are focused only on AgTech. They are generic investors and they do AgTech funding as well. Nearly half of the investment has been made in Series A and beyond, and the rest is more in early stage AgTech. It clearly shows that investors are looking at this sector and are willing to support right early stage AgTech if there is a promise. And even as part of our financial inclusion lab, we are working with some of them who work on the intersection of finance and agri. I think this looks very interesting that AgTechs are really flourishing. I think let's look at the challenges that they face. So fundamentally, they also have their own share of challenges, and they are all around funding, partnerships, and access to data. So if they have the right environment and collaboration that Bhomik was talking in the beginning, they can do much more and at a scale to benefit the entire agriculture and livelihood, besides providing employment to a lot of people. Let me just try to highlight a couple of challenges here. The first one is all around how funding is made available. The investors, they worry about high risk and fairly regulated, directly or indirectly sector. Of course, regulations are just coming down in this sector. They perceive a plenty of policy risk, and we know that there are a lot of issues around the policy around that. In addition, there is a limited leverage in case some of the actors, they want to do funding in the farmer. They realize that there is a limited leverage in terms of credit guarantee structure, so which makes it very, very difficult for them. Second is around collaboration and partnership. What we see that AgTechs have something, but not everything. And if you want to make it work and scale, they need the right partnership and collaboration, which is quite an uphill task. Because what is really happening is that there is a limited understanding about the AgTechs and there is expectation mismatch. If we talk about banks, they have their own systems and it is very difficult to force the partnerships based on old EKC system of banks and new age open API systems of new AgTechs. Third is that AgTechs work or they prefer to work on data because this is where the strength is. And this basically has them in providing suitable inputs to and has their risk because anyways they are working with the farmers. It itself is a risky proposition for many of the tech players. Though we have built robust digital rails in India, and a lot of that is being used for payment system, but still startups face a lot of resistance to get the basic data. Say for example, a large part of reliable data in terms of NAT can come only from government, and there is hardly any efficient way to capture and build on that. So they have to spend, actors have to really spend a lot of time and effort in getting this data. And last is that let's understand that the customer segment that we are talking about, we are dealing with a customer segment which is widely dispersed. This makes the cost of acquisition very high unless there is something like aggregation. Though smartphone penetration is growing in India, but still a large part of India is running on feature phone, and hence many of these possibilities are limited. I think it's enough of me by now. Let me just take the last slide wherein we are talking about some of the recommendations. Before I talk about this, I think there are few things that we should be knowing about. I think we all know that there are a lot of fundamental changes that we are seeing in the country, including in the agri sector. Recently, we have seen that there is a liberalization of Essential Commodities Act, APMC Act, and contract farming. With this, probably we are ushering in a new era. With this, we are also hopeful that government will encourage private sector investments in building more efficient value chains, and that would be beneficial for both producers as well as consumers. In addition to that, on August 9th, very recently, Prime Minister announced that 1 lakh crore of agriculture infrastructure fund. This will be used over a period of the next 4 years. And this is primarily meant to build post-harvest storage and processing facilities. Though this fund is primarily targeted to farmers, producers, organizations, but it is also available to individual entrepreneurs if they want to. Definitely, this fund will help provide loans at concessional rates to FPOs and other entrepreneurs through primary agricultural cooperative societies or PACs. And NABARD is going to manage this thing. And since NABARD is also responsible for creation of 10,000 more FPOs, it can. This is our wishful thinking that it can create a package that can help those FPOs realize better prices. As I said earlier, it's not easy for small farmers to hold stocks for long because they do not because they need urgent cash to meet their family expenditure. Therefore, it requires more than just storage facilities at the FPO level. It may mean new financing option. It has to be a new option so that they can overcome their liquidity requirement. There is another issue that we should keep in mind about agriculture and the farmers, and that is related to doubling of farmers' income by 2022-23. With the kind of growth that we are seeing as of now, something like say 3 to 4% or around that, of course, it would be extremely uphill tasks unless we do something more than what we have been doing. And I think that is where the role of technology and other relevant intervention would be. There have been a lot of discussions around how to provide cash-based support to farmers, because all of us know that there is a scheme which is going on by the name PM Kisan. But the farmers, they are receiving benefits. Most of those benefits are indirect in nature, for example, fertilizer subsidy, and they are considered fairly suboptimal. So there have been a lot of recommendations that can be make it more optimal for the farmers and it can perhaps enhance the income of farmers. So coming to what we need to do is that we need to see how do we work in a collaborative manner. On one hand, farmers like Sham need support. There is a possibility that AgTech can provide that. But for that to happen, we need to collaborate to set the rails or the bridges. On one hand, AgTech can provide interesting solutions at different stages of farm life cycle, but it will be difficult for them to reach out to single farmers like Sham. Hence, an appropriate aggregation can help this cause at lower cost. More collaboration will help do the pilots and see how it works before the solutions are scaled. As discussed earlier, AgTechs have a variety of solutions, but farmers may need a range of solutions to cover the entire farm life cycle. This is only possible through a common platform so that it can cover whole 9 yards of imports, outputs, data, and financing. And we know that AgTechs are growing rapidly in India. We see that this trend to continue and this become more important in post-COVID world. If we collaborate and come together, there is a possibility that we can make India as a global hub for others to learn and replicate what we have done so far. So I would just round up with a couple of suggestions and on how we can do that. I think this is a time that we should be designing and developing a platform so that AgTechs can work for the overall benefit of farmers and livelihood. And this can come through catalytic support from those who believe in it. So let us join hands for this noble cause. And thank you for patient hearing. Over to you.
Thanks, Anil. We can invite Raj Kumar, to share the real life stories now from PayAgri.
Thank you. First of all, thanks a lot to MSC and CSR Box for this opportunity to interact with like-minded people. And Anil, that was a very wonderful and detailed presentation. And I think it's a wise decision for me not to do any presentation now, because any presentation following a presentation will look like a repetitive. Thanks for a good presentation. So I'm here to share real-time experiences and how we started, why we started this PayAgri, how we started it, and what are we doing right now to support the livelihood of small and marginal farmers in India. Actually, the idea or the seed to start the PayAgri has come from one interaction with a farmer in a place called Bodinaikanur, which is 75 kilometers from Madurai. I hail from that particular village. So after a long gap, my childhood days, I used to visit my village every vacation. Um, so after almost 10-15 years, I so happened for me to visit my village in 2010. And I was totally shocked because the kind of village which I saw in my childhood days and the village which I saw in 2010 was extremely different. That too within a decade. So most of my relatives, the neighbors, they used to do farming. They left farming. They gave up farming completely. And my cousins who were supposed to start take farming practices from their parents, they also left farming and they went to nearest towns to do some kind of petty jobs in hotels and kind of retail shops kind of thing. I was shocked literally. And then I was checking with one of my relatives, my uncle. He said, why did you stop farming? What happened? And he actually gave me hundreds of reasons that prevented him from pursuing farming as a livelihood opportunity for them. He shared all those pains, emotions, and whatever trouble they faced, and it was really quite shocking for me to listen to those kind of stories. And I started correlating a couple of uh, like critical statistics or data which I came across during my investment banking days. One was about food crisis. In 2050, with global population of 900 crores, 9 billion plus, and there'll be a huge and acute food shortage for more than 200 crores of people in the world. That means everyone will fight for a food in 2050, which is an inevitable food crisis. So that was an alarming statistics. And other side, farmers are giving up farming. So this is gonna add, fuel to the fire, and and obviously the food gap is gonna be much larger in 2050. And that was a time I was blessed with a daughter. And whenever I see my daughter, I used to see what is it I'm gonna give you in future. Is it wealth I'm gonna create, or is the food that I need to give you without any problem? To give that food, obviously you need farmers. And unless farmers face the livelihood problems, and they're not going to come back to the farming. So this is the one learning that made me and my co-founder Rajiv to think hard about getting into the sector. The other side, both of us, Rajiv and myself, came across a brilliant statement from John F. Kennedy. In his days, he said that was quite striking. Farmers are the only people in the economy who buys everything in retail price and sells everything in wholesale price. What a fundamental mistake that is. Obviously, if you want to make profit, you have to buy it in wholesale price and sell it in retail price. But here it is other way around. With this kind of system, with this kind of practices, how can you ensure farmers to make decent earning and ensure their livelihood and continue to farming and continue to support people like us to have our 3 meals in a day? That was a striking, learning that made us to leave our career as a banker and as an investment banker and wanted to focus more into agriculture sector. So we both, Rajiv and myself, discussed in detail. Rajiv was in core banking segment and taking care of rural banking website. I was into investment banking. So I had the luxury of taking independent assignments. So we decided one of us should leave the job and start understanding this segment. So I love farming. So I decided, let me do that, Rajiv. So I left my job in 2012. And first thing what we did is I became a farmer. So I took lands on lease in Madurai district in Tamil Nadu, as well as in Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu, which is Ooty, and started doing farming activities because we strongly believe that its agriculture is quite complex, forced by 80 to 90% of uncontrollable factors, unlike any other businesses. So unless you do it by yourself, you will not understand the nuances and the challenges in agriculture and cannot put yourself in the shoes of farmers. Uh, so we started doing agriculture, farming. We were trying multiple crops in first couple of years. We failed miserably initially, but slowly we picked it up. We learned it. We understood what needs to be done to create a sustainable farming. And with that idea, plus we visited thousands of farmers from Kanyakumari to Himachal Pradesh. We understood their problems because India is one unique landscape. For every 10 kilometers, you have a different type of soil condition. So as the soil condition changes, the agricultural practices changes, the crop pattern changes. So every 10 kilometers, you have a new learning. So we wanted to meet almost all across India and meet various type of farmers. We wanted to understand it. So with that learning, so we decided to start PayAgri to eliminate three of the major inefficiencies or problems faced by Indian small and marginal farmers. When I say Indian farmers, as it is 86% of smaller marginal farmers, obviously they're our major focus group. And so first inefficiency or first problem what we wanted to solve is middleman system. We all know about middlemen and their intervention in Indian farmers' life. But to what extent and how many middlemen in a farmer life, that was still a mystery to a lot of people. So when we did a detailed analysis, and we strongly believe that a farmer life is managed, or the value created by a farmer is being controlled or exploited or routed through at least 6 to 10 layers of middlemen. To a farmer, whatever he needs as an input, seeds, fertilizers, implements, they have a channel of distribution, which is organized middleman system. And whatever they produce as an output, there is a much bigger unorganized middleman system. There are at least 3 to 5 layers. So by the time a farmer procures an material and cultivates it or produces it and sends the material to an end consumer, there are 8 to 9 people are willing to share the value created by the farmer, which is certainly unacceptable. With this kind of intervention, how can a farmer ensure his livelihood? Let's forget farmer making a huge profit or savings. At least he needs his principal amount to come back. He needs to manage his family needs. This is what maximum they expect. But unfortunately, they are not in a position to achieve even this very basic requirement. So when this 8 to 10 layer of middlemen shares the value created by the farmer, obviously farmers are not able to achieve the inclusive growth or the livelihood. So we decided when we do, when you're creating a pedigree model, our first objective is to reduce this middleman, if not 100%, at least by 60 to 70%. All the problems for farmer is cash-based transaction. Farmers deals everything in cash. Whatever he buys, it's in cash. He pays wages in cash and sale proceeds in cash. So what happens is he's not creating any kind of financial transaction track record for him, or no financial profile for him. Most of the farmers I'm talking about. Anil shared a beautiful statistics. The smaller marginal farmers, hardly 20% of the people are able to access to the formal and formal financial support, and that too at very normal interest rate. Otherwise, they need to go to different places with abnormal interest rate to get their manage their financial requirement. So when there is no financial profile, how can a banker take informed lending decisions about a farmer? So this cash-based transaction is the other major problem. So what happens is when they're not able to get, loan from a formal source at good interest rate, they go to local money lenders. And these money lenders in turn become the first layer of middlemen to procure their produce. So this is a vicious cycle they are in, and they're not able to come out of it. So every crop cycle, it is getting repeated. So these two are another major inefficiencies. Another problem is, it's not the problem of farmers, it's a problem of landholding sizes. We are mostly small and marginal farmers. If you want to use agri technologies or mechanization, or you want to directly sell it to any buyer, or you want to take inputs from the manufacturer, they are not able to have enough volume to achieve all those things. So the landholding size is denying themselves to get the benefits of large-scale farmers. So these are three problems we wanted to solve with PayAgri. And so we created this PayAgri model in 2017, Rajiv and myself, in February. The first thing what we wanted to do is like we wanted to digitize farmers and create 360-degree linkages to these farmers. So that's why we call ourselves, though we are mostly known as an output a startup, but we are basically agri ecosystem platform, and we work with all the needs of farmers in that particular value chain. Predominantly, we started with marketing linkages. So as we know, the first problem is, middleman system. So we wanted to connect farmers directly with the buyer. So we went and approached a large retail brand. Said, sir, we are coming from Teni, and we wanted to connect material from farmers, and we have a lot of coconut farmers in our region. We wanted to connect them with you. They said, we are very happy to work with farmers. We would like to support them, but we have some conditions. One, we won't pay immediately. We need a 7 days credit time. But with farmers, I don't think they'll give credit. Number two, we want coconut in a specific size, say 500 grams to 550 grams. So we took their requirement. Obviously, they are a large corporate client. They have their own quality and financial requirements. So we came back and we discussed about this farmer in Theni district. It's a place called Uttampalayam. And he said, sir, I'm willing to give 500 to 550 grams, but you have to help me with one thing. You need to invent me a coconut tree that produces only 500 to 550 grams. If that's the case, I'm willing to give it. And obviously, that's not possible. And in a coconut tree, you get coconut sizes between 250 grams to 800 or even sometimes 850 grams. In areas like Pollachi and Nagarkoil in Tamil Nadu, even Kerala and Palakkad region and all, you get coconut sizes between even 850 grams also. So this is a practical gap that is enabling middlemen to play a role in the life. A farmer wants to give it to a buyer directly. A buyer wants to work with farmer, but they have different requirements. To match these requirements, plenty of players are coming in between and working. So to sort out this issue, then I need to buy all the grades from the farmer, 250 grams to 800 grams. What will I do with the remaining thing? So as a pedigree, as a model, we always do the value chain study initially. So we took this coconut value chain study in depth, and we understood that how the entire value chain operates and who are the type of buyers for different grades. So we figured it out. 250 grams to 400 grams, we can sell it to copra manufacturers who makes coconut oil out of this copra. Then 400 to 500 grams, you can give it to small shops, kirana stores, kind of thing. 500 to 600, all the retail brands, even online delivery platforms. So we can work with them. And 600 and above, you can give it to hotels. Basically, hotels need a big cup size of coconut. So we understood this, and we approached the coconut farmer. The next challenge comes: where will I bring this coconut? Where will I grade it? Where will I dispatch it? So we understood we need to create critical infrastructure. So as a pedigree model, we always do the critical value chains. We digitize the farmers. We basically work with aggregated farmers group like farmer producer companies or NGOs, farmer clubs, and we digitize them. Then we do the value chain study. We have created right infrastructure to aggregate the material, sort it out, and dispatch it to different kind of buyers. And today, farmers' product from Madurai district is already reached UK. So we are also exporting the farmers' product. So these are our strengths. So this is happening because of our detailed understanding about the farmers' problems and the practical requirement of both buyers and the farmers. And we created critical infrastructure. To give another example, there's a place called Vadugubeti. It is also in Theni district. It is India's largest garlic marketplace. Garlic from Gujarat, Maharashtra, Himachal Pradesh, all these garlics comes to a small village called Vadugubeti, and every household they grade, pack, process and grade this garlic, and they sell it in the market in the Vadugubeti. But Vadugubeti, as it's a small village, they never had an storage or a processing infrastructure there. So we studied that particular value chain. So along with a couple of like-minded people, we have created 24,000 square feet of large godown space in Vadugubeti. And as I speak now, today is the market day. Today, more than 300 metric tons of garlic has come from different parts of region to Vadugubeti and to this infrastructure, and it is properly graded and it's properly connected to the buyers right now. So we as a pedigree work on all the basic requirements. So to put in a nutshell, we are an agri-ecosystem platform working towards the benefit of small and marginal farmers to achieve the basic requirement of livelihood and bring an inclusive growth in the agri-value chain. Thank you.
Thanks, Rajkumar, for sharing your inspiring story and talking about the challenges you went through. Right. So we have one question. We are running behind time, so we'll just quickly jump to question as well. So possibly Anil can take up this question. The question is about the AgTech investors. So Anil, I think the audience want to know who all are active in the AgTech space in terms of investment.
Okay. Thanks, Anurag. Actually, there are plenty. In fact, depending on the stage that you are in. So there are few actually which I'm just naming on the basis of what they have funded in 2020. For example, there are few which are very prominent. Mumbai Angels is a set of investors community which is making investments in the current year. Bloom Venture is another which makes investment. In fact, Sequoia and Omnivore, both of them, they have made a large investment in this year. Avishkar Group continues to make investment in this area. We also see Alivar and Global Innovation, they are active into this space. Recently, VCs like say Aspada and Lightbox, they have taken very large exposure. So there are plenty in the market. Most of them, they invest in different spaces as well as in AgTech. That is what basically I was trying to say.
Can I add a point here? I just want to play my investment banker role here a bit.
Yeah.
In this kind of scenario, obviously, as you rightly said, there are a lot of major names as a VCs and PE players focusing agri-tech and agriculture sector. But I also want a lot of, early stage startups to target some of the local industrial houses, business houses. And in this present COVID scenario, they all wanted to diversify into different areas from their core businesses. And if you're able to convince some of the business houses there, and obviously they're investing, and actually Paygree, we got our pre-series A from one such textile-based group a month back. We've been focusing only on VCs and PEs earlier, and COVID obviously creates some kind of setback in the decision-making process. So we approached a large business house who are basically 100% export-oriented unit in textile industry. They send exports of textile garments to UK and all. And COVID has hit them very badly, and it made their top management to think and diversify in the newest sector. And this is what happened even 2008 crisis also. I was with Brand Capital that time, private treaties, managing huge portfolio there. And that was a time, lot of industrial houses, including Times Group, they were looking for a lot of diversifications. So whenever any crisis comes, business houses diversify, and it's a right time for an early stage startups like us to approach them in addition to all these established agri-focused VC funds.
And many, Rajkumar, you're right actually, and many of them, they are actively looking out, in the sense like they may not have funded any AgTech so far, but it doesn't mean that they are not going to fund, because everyone is diversifying and they know that this makes more sense in the new normal.
Exactly.
So there's a link question, Anil and Rajkumar, that what is the typical tenure that VCs expect return on their investment? I know there cannot be a thumb rule, but still there's a question that about the typical tenure.
I think Rajkumar can tell from his experience.
Not only in AgTech, generally VCs like an tenure between 3 to 5 years. So that's a kind of VCs would like to stay and exit between 3 to 5 years once they want to reach. But in AgTech, I'm expecting, because it's a new segment and a lot of investments happened hardly a couple of years back, and already we have seen on huge exit from one of the AgTech companies. But safer say we can say 5 to 7 years in AgTech space. That's what my opinion is.
Okay.
Just adding to what Rajkumar is saying, actually it all depends on the nature of the fund, in the sense like while they reach out to their investors, like VCs, they reach out to their investors, there is something that they commit to them, what should be the period and what is the fund objective and all these things. So it is basically varying from around 3 years to the least, and 7 to 8 years is the max.
Yes.
Actually, that is.
You're right.
Beyond that, actually, it's very difficult for them to get the money from their investors also.
Yes.
So there's another question for Rajkumar he would love to answer. I would request him to be brief. That how is the response from the farmer for Paygree? Are you operating in Tamil Nadu or it's pan-India operations? And how is the revenue percentage you're getting from that?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And response from the farmer initially, until you build trust with the farmer, it's very difficult to get them as part of your ecosystem, because farmers all throughout their ages they've been exploited. So whenever any new company or a person meets them, they first always see you with some suspicion. But you can build trust only by showing them the value that you can create with them. So when I procure a material from a farmer, and he always compare the price that I'm giving, he compares it with the neighboring farmer who is selling it through the traditional middleman system. Moment they realize that I am giving them the better price and my weighing is accurate, when I make an immediate payment in the farm gate itself, then trust starts building, and they spread good word about us amongst all the nearest farmers. So the initial entry in that one particular region is always a tough job. Once you're able to establish that you are there as a value creator from the farmer, then they will take care of rest of the brand building activities. That's what we have seen it. And presently, we are operating in Tamil Nadu, and we also have, as I said, we work predominantly with farmer producer companies, NGOs, farmer clubs. So we have a similar arrangement even in Gujarat also to work with spices farmers. And we have a strong marketing linkage activities in Kerala. And we have recently opened our infrastructure in Bangalore. And soon we'll be having full presence in Karnataka and some part of Andhra. But presently, Tamil Nadu, we are fully focusing on Tamil Nadu and 20% focus in Karnataka, Kerala, and Gujarat. And by end of next year, we should be present in all the 4 southern districts and couple of northern India states.
Right. Thanks, Rajkumar. Now, Anil, another question, and possibly I think you can quickly answer this, is are there any examples of AgTech players who are linking up mandis and the warehouses, both in government and private space? I think there are many, but possibly you can name a few and people can search more for it.
Probably Agri is also an example.
Yeah.
And frankly speaking, that this question continues to remain relevant despite abolition of APMC Act. So there is always a combination of supply chain in the sense like there are farmers, those who are producing, there are users, those who want to buy. In case the supply chain Act is not able to meet the demand, they always tie up with the mandis either directly or indirectly so as to ensure. Say for example, if you put yourself into the shoes of Rajkumar, if there is the demand is static and if supply is not static, he has to make sure that this happens. Otherwise, he loses the buyer actually.
Correct.
So I think there are plenty, and when we have the next AgTech Thursday, one of them is going to talk about that.
Right. Thanks, Anil. I think possibly with this, I can take only the one last question because we are running behind time. Are there any AgTech players who are providing price discovery services whilst linking it with assaying and branding services?
Yeah, answer to that is yes. And I would strongly request that probably you hear the next webinar also. So you will have the practitioner, those who are really doing it.
Right. So I think with this question, before I thank for this fabulous session, I think if I, just write down my takeaways from this session. So when Anil, Bhaumik, Rajkumar and I, we were thinking that what exactly we can present in this session and why should this series be there in terms of the relevance. So we realized that, the beauty of India Livelihood Collective is that we are bringing from different spheres of life, right? So we see a problem from different perspectives, and converging these perspectives may, take us closer to the solution, right? So when Anil was taking us through the landscape, we saw 650,000 villages, 550 million people working in agriculture, but only 86% of the farmers are, majority of the farmers are working in less than 2 hectares. So how we can solve the livelihood problem by going the traditional route? At the same time, we saw that AgTech is growing at a 25% growth. We are the second largest. We also saw the potential that when the AgTech, players work on the ground, they not only, provide employment, they also give a lot of skilling opportunities to the larger segment in the rural world. Right. So this is something which is quite interesting because agriculture is quite seasonal, right? So unless we start equipping people with diverse set of skills, which, possibly AgTech players can play a role, there's a possibility of converging the AgTech world and the traditional agriculture world. So welcome to this webinar series with this, because I think we'll be exploring more, we'll be knowing more about the other startups. And I think most of your answers, you will find because Anil has bringing so many startups, and you will also find investors in this series who will bring in different kind of perspectives. So with this, I really want to thank, first the ILC team, for giving the opportunity to host this. Anil for, collecting all this knowledge. I know it becomes quite difficult, to present, to diverse set of audience and bringing in all the insights together in such a short span of time. Rajkumar, obviously, I know and how difficult is this for an entrepreneur to find time for a webinar. Right? There are a number of things are going on, right? So thanks, Rajkumar, for finding time for this. Yeah. So thanks a lot to the audience as well.